Amanda Rivers had always been known for her quick temper and even quicker reactions. At 34, she was a successful marketing executive from New York, who prided herself on being direct, assertive, and unwilling to tolerate what she perceived as disrespect from anyone. Her friends often joked that she could start an argument in an empty room. But they also admired her fierce independence and refusal to back down from any challenge. This particular October morning found Amanda on what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation in London. She had saved for 2 years to afford this trip, planning every detail from her luxury hotel near Hyde Park to her carefully researched itinerary of museums, theaters, and historic sites. The vacation was meant to be a reward for landing the biggest client of her career, achievement that had required months of 16-hour days and countless sacrifices. However, the trip had been plagued with disappointments from the moment she arrived. Her flight had been delayed by 8 hours, causing her to miss her first day's planned activities. The hotel had lost her reservation despite her confirmation emails, forcing her to spend hours arguing with staff before they found her a room that was smaller and noisier than what she had booked. Her carefully planned theater tickets turned out to be for the wrong date, and the museum she most wanted to visit was unexpectedly closed for renovations. By the time Amanda made her way to Buckingham Palace on her 4th day in London, she was already feeling frustrated and defensive. The crowded streets, the constant drizzle of rain, and the general chaos of tourist season had pushed her patience to its breaking point. She had woken up that morning to find that her favorite jacket had been ruined by a leak in her hotel room ceiling, and the concierge's dismissive attitude when she complained had set the tone for another difficult day. Amanda approached the palace gates with her camera ready, hoping to at least get some good photographs to make the expensive trip feel worthwhile. She had read online about the famous changing of the guard ceremony and was particularly interested in getting photos that would impress her colleagues back home. Her competitive nature extended even to her vacation experiences, and she was determined to return with stories and images that would prove she had made the most of her time in London. Standing at his post near the palace entrance was Sergeant William Chen, a 29-year-old member of the Grenadier Guards who had been serving in the Queen's Guard for 4 years. William took immense pride in his role, viewing it not just as a job, but as a sacred trust that connected him to centuries of British military tradition. His own path to the Guards had been unconventional. He was the son of Chinese immigrants, who had come to Britain with nothing but hopes for a better life. William's parents had worked multiple jobs to support their family, his father as a restaurant cook and his mother as a seamstress, often working 18-hour days to make ends meet. They had instilled in their children the values of hard work, respect for authority, and dedication to something greater than oneself. When William announced his intention to join the military, his parents had been both proud and terrified, knowing that their son was choosing a path that would demand everything from him. The sergeant had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before being selected for the prestigious position with the Queen's Guard. The transition from active combat to ceremonial duties had been challenging in ways he hadn't expected. In Afghanistan, his alertness and quick reactions had saved lives. In his current role, those same instincts had to be carefully controlled, channeled into the disciplined stillness that the position required. William understood that his role was about much more than standing guard at a tourist attraction. He represented the continuity of British institutions, the reliability of military service, and the bridge between the monarchy and the people. Every day he stood as a living symbol of stability and tradition in an increasingly chaotic world. The uniform he wore carried the weight of history, and he never forgot the honor and responsibility that came with it. As Amanda approached with her camera, William could sense her agitated energy, even from a distance. He had developed an ability to read tourists' moods and intentions, a skill that helped him maintain his composure regardless of what happened around him. Most visitors were respectful, content to take photos from a distance and observe the ceremony with appropriate reverence. Others were more challenging, testing his patience with loud comments or inappropriate behavior. But there was something different about this particular woman. Her body language suggested barely contained frustration. and her movements were sharp and aggressive in a way that made William subtly increase his alertness while maintaining his stoic exterior. He had no way of knowing that Amanda's week of disappointments had created a perfect storm of emotions, or that she was about to make a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The stage was set for a confrontation that would begin with a moment of shocking violence, but evolve into something neither Amanda nor William could have anticipated. In the space of a few seconds, two very different lives were about to intersect in a way that would challenge everything both of them thought they knew about justice, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. The incident happened so quickly that most of the nearby tourists didn't even realize what had occurred until it was over. Amanda had been trying to position herself for the perfect photograph, growing increasingly frustrated as other visitors kept walking into her frame just as she was about to take the shot. The October wind kept blowing her hair across her face, and the intermittent rain was making it difficult to keep her camera lens clear. "Excuse me," Amanda called out to William, assuming he would step aside, or at least acknowledge her presence so she could get an unobstructed photo. When the guard maintained his rigid position and fixed stare, she felt a familiar surge of irritation. In her world of corporate negotiations and client management, ignoring someone was considered the height of rudeness, and she interpreted William's professional stillness as a personal slight. Amanda tried again, this time walking directly in front of the guard and waving her hand near his face. "Hello? Can you move just a little bit to the right? I'm trying to get a photo here." Her voice carried the tone she typically used with uncooperative service workers, a mixture of impatience and authority that had served her well in business, but was completely inappropriate for this situation. William remained perfectly motionless, his training keeping him focused on his duties despite the growing distraction. He had dealt with countless similar situations over his years of service, and he knew that acknowledging Amanda's demands would only encourage further disruption. His role required him to be a steady, unchanging presence, regardless of what happened around him. The guard's continued silence pushed Amanda's frustration to a breaking point. The accumulated disappointments of her vacation, combined with her natural tendency to take charge of situations, created a perfect storm of poor judgment. In her mind, William's behavior represented everything that had gone wrong with her trip: people being unhelpful, ignoring her needs, failing to provide the service she felt she deserved after spending so much money. Without thinking through the consequences, Amanda stepped closer to William and raised her voice. "Are you deaf? I'm talking to you." When he still didn't respond, she made the decision that would change everything. In a moment of pure impulse, driven by days of accumulated frustration and her lifelong habit of demanding immediate attention, Amanda drew back her hand and slapped William hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed across the courtyard, like a gunshot, causing every head in the vicinity to turn toward them. William's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and for a moment, time seemed frozen. Amanda herself was shocked by what she had done, her hands still raised as if she couldn't quite believe she had actually struck a uniformed guard at one of Britain's most famous landmarks. William's training kicked in immediately, but not in the way Amanda might have expected. Instead of reacting with anger or aggression, he slowly turned his head back to face forward, his expression remaining completely neutral. The red handprint on his cheek was clearly visible, but his composure never wavered. This wasn't the first time he had been physically challenged during his service, though previous incidents had usually involved drunken tourists or overly excited children rather than a seemingly rational adult. The crowd's reaction was immediate. An intense gasps of shock rippled through the gathered tourists, and several people began shouting at Amanda. A woman with a British accent called out, "How dare you?" while a man started recording the aftermath with his phone. Children began crying at the sudden tension in raised voices, and their parents quickly moved them away from the scene. Amanda stood frozen, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what she had done. The sea of disapproving faces around her made her realize that she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Her New York assertiveness, which had always served her well in business situations, had led her to assault a member of the British military at one of the most photographed locations. In London, within moments, Palace security appeared on the scene. Two officers approached Amanda calmly but firmly, their professional demeanor making it clear that this was a serious situation that would be handled according to proper protocols. The lead officer, Inspector James Morrison, had 20 years of experience dealing with incidents at royal locations, but even he was surprised by the brazenness of what had occurred. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us," Inspector Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who is accustomed to being obeyed without question. Amanda's immediate instinct was to argue, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had simply lost her temper and didn't mean any real harm. But the serious expressions on the officers' faces made it clear that explanations would have to wait. As Amanda was led away from the scene, she caught one last glimpse of William, who remained at his post despite the chaos that had erupted around. The handprint on his cheek was already beginning to fade, but his dignity remained intact. He continued to perform his duties as if nothing had happened, his professional composure serving as a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that Amanda was beginning to experience. The crowd slowly dispersed, but many people remained to watch the aftermath, taking photos and videos that would soon find their way to social media platforms around the world. What Amanda didn't realize yet was that her moment of poor judgment had been captured by dozens of cameras and would soon make her infamous in ways she never could have imagined. Within hours of Amanda's arrest, videos of the incident were circulating across every major social media platform. The footage, captured from multiple angles by different tourists, showed the slap in crystal clear detail, along with William's remarkably composed response. The hashtag Royal Guard slap began trending worldwide. With millions of views and thousands of comments pouring in from around the globe, Amanda found herself in a holding cell at a London police station, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. The initial shock and adrenaline had worn off, leaving her face to face with the consequences of her impulsive action. Inspector Morrison had explained that she was being charged with assault on a member of the military, a serious offense that could result in significant fines and even imprisonment. "I need to call my lawyer," Amanda said for the third time, her voice shaking as she began to comprehend the gravity of her situation. The duty officer had already explained that she would be allowed her phone call once the initial processing was complete. But the bureaucratic pace of the legal system felt torturous to someone accustomed to immediate responses and quick solutions. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, William continued his shift despite the growing media attention surrounding the incident. His superior officers had offered to relieve him early, but he had respectfully declined, insisting that he could complete his duties despite what had happened. This decision would later be seen as yet another demonstration of his exceptional professionalism and dedication to service. The story was picked up by news outlets across Britain and then internationally. The Guardian ran a headline reading, "American Tourist Assaults Royal Guard in Shocking Palace Incident," while the BBC led their evening news with footage of the slap and interviews with witnesses. Cable news networks in the United States began running the story continuously, with commentators debating everything from tourist behavior to cultural differences between Americans and Britons. Social media reaction was swift and brutal toward Amanda. Twitter users shared her photo alongside harsh criticism of her behavior, with many calling for her to face the maximum possible penalties. Facebook groups dedicated to supporting the royal family posted angry messages demanding justice for the Guard. Instagram influencers used the incident as an opportunity to discuss respect for military service members and the importance of cultural sensitivity when traveling abroad. But as the story developed, something unexpected began to happen. More information about Sergeant William Chen started to emerge, painting a picture of a man whose life had been dedicated to service and sacrifice. Military bloggers shared details about his tours in Afghanistan, his commendations for bravery, and his impeccable record during his time with the Queen's Guard. The contrast between his dignified response to the assault and Amanda's aggressive behavior made the story even more compelling to news outlets and social media users. Amanda's lawyer, hastily contacted from New York, flew to London to represent her. Martin Goldstein was a high-powered attorney who specialized in crisis management for corporate executives. But even he was surprised by the international attention the case was receiving. "We need to get ahead of this story," he told Amanda. During their first meeting, the video footage is damaging, but we can work with the narrative if we're smart about it. However, Amanda was beginning to realize that this situation was unlike anything she had ever faced in her professional life. No amount of strategic communication or corporate damage control could undo the fact that millions of people around the world had watched her strike a military service member who was simply doing his job. The shame and embarrassment were overwhelming, made worse by the knowledge that her actions had been captured and preserved forever. Back at the palace, William was dealing with his own challenges. Media requests for interviews were pouring in, and he was receiving messages of support from military personnel and civilians around the world. His commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Hartwell, called him into her office to discuss the situation. "Sergeant Chen," the colonel said, "your conduct during and after the incident has been exemplary. You've shown exactly the kind of professionalism and restraint that we expect from the Queen's Guard. However, I want you to know that we're taking this assault very seriously and will be supporting you throughout the legal proceedings." William nodded respectfully, but something in his expression suggested that he was processing the situation in a way that his superiors might not expect. "Ma'am, I appreciate the support, but I keep thinking about why it happened." The woman seemed genuinely frustrated and upset before she struck me. "I'm wondering if there might be more to the story than what the videos show." Colonel Hartwell was surprised by William's response. Most people in his situation would be focused on seeking justice, or at least ensuring that the perpetrator faced appropriate consequences. But William's concern for understanding Amanda's motivations revealed something about his character that the videos couldn't capture, a level of empathy and thoughtfulness that set him apart from others. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, and both sides were preparing their strategies. Amanda's lawyer was planning to argue that the assault was an isolated incident resulting from temporary stress and cultural misunderstanding. The prosecution was building a case around the seriousness of attacking a military service member and the need to send a clear message about appropriate behavior toward those serving in official capacities. But neither side was prepared for what William Chen was quietly planning: a response to the incident that would surprise everyone involved and transform a simple assault case into something much more profound and meaningful. The day before the preliminary hearing, William Chen made a decision that would shock everyone involved in the case. He requested a meeting with the prosecuting attorney, Crown Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell, to discuss his position on Amanda's case. When he arrived at her office, William was still in uniform, having come directly from his duties at the palace. "Sergeant Chen," Prosecutor Mitchell began, "I want you to know that we're treating this case with the utmost seriousness. Assault on a military service member is a grave offense, and we intend to seek the full penalty allowed under law. Your exemplary conduct during and after the incident has only strengthened our case." William sat quietly for a moment before responding, his words carefully chosen. "Ma'am, I appreciate your commitment to justice, but I'd like to request something unusual. I want to speak with Ms. Rivers before the hearing. I believe there may be an opportunity here for something more meaningful than simply punishment." Prosecutor was taken aback. In her 15 years of handling assault cases, she had never had a victim request a meeting with their attacker. "Sergeant, I must advise you that meeting with the defendant could complicate the prosecution. Are you certain this is what you want?" William nodded firmly. "I've been thinking about this for days. What she did was wrong, and yes, it was assault. But I keep coming back to the look in her eyes just before and just after it happened. She seemed genuinely shocked by her own actions. I think she's dealing with something deeper than simple bad behavior." Meanwhile, Amanda was struggling with her own internal turmoil. The international attention had made it impossible for her to process the incident privately. Her hotel room had been surrounded by reporters, forcing her to relocate to a different location. Her company had placed her on indefinite leave, pending the resolution of the criminal case. Friends and family were calling constantly, some offering support, but others expressing disappointment and confusion about her behavior. The worst part was watching herself on the endless loop of news coverage. Seeing her own actions from an outside perspective, Amanda was horrified by what she had become in that moment. The woman in the videos looked angry, entitled, and completely out of control, everything she had always prided herself on not being in her professional life. When her lawyer informed her that the guard wanted to meet with her, Amanda's first reaction was suspicion. Is this some kind of trap? Is he trying to get me to admit guilt, or say something that will make the case worse for me? Martin Goldstein shared her concerns. I've never seen anything like this, Amanda. Usually victims in assault cases want nothing to do with the perpetrator. I'm not sure what his angle is, but I'd advise extreme caution. Anything you say to him could potentially be used against you. However, Amanda found herself curious about the man she had struck. The media coverage had revealed details about William's background that made her assault seem even more shameful. He was a decorated veteran who had served his country with distinction. Someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others. The contrast between his service and her aggression was stark and uncomfortable. The meeting was arranged for the following morning in a conference room at the prosecutor's office. Both attorneys present. When Amanda walked into the room and saw William in person for the first time since the incident, she was struck by how young he looked without the formal bearskin hat. The red mark from her slap had faded, but the memory of what she had done felt as fresh as ever. William stood when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that made Amanda feel even worse about her behavior. Ms. Rivers, he said quietly, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this is an unusual situation. Amanda sat down across from him, her hands shaking slightly. I don't understand why you wanted to see me. If I were you, I'd want nothing to do with the person who attacked me. William studied her face for a moment before responding. I've been wondering about that myself, but I keep thinking about something my commanding officer in Afghanistan once told me. He said that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that happen after the shooting stops. The battles to understand why conflicts happen and how to prevent them from happening again. The comment caught Amanda off guard. She had expected anger or demands for an apology, not philosophical reflection on the nature of conflict. I don't understand what you mean. What happened between us lasted maybe 5 seconds, William continued, but it was the result of circumstances that had been building for much longer than that. You were frustrated, angry, feeling unheard. I was doing my job following protocols that probably seemed dismissive and rude from your perspective. Neither of us saw the other person's humanity in that moment. Amanda felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm not a violent person, she said quietly. I've never hit anyone in my life. I don't know what came over me. Everything had gone wrong with my trip, and when you wouldn't acknowledge me, I just snapped. There's no excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that it's not who I really am. William nodded thoughtfully. I believe you. I want you to know that I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're someone who made a very bad decision in a moment of frustration. The question is, what do we do with that understanding? Both lawyers were listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Prosecutor Mitchell had expected the meeting to last perhaps 10 minutes. Just long enough for William to confront his attacker and reinforce the seriousness of her actions. Instead, she was witnessing something that resembled a counseling session more than a confrontation between victim and perpetrator. What are you suggesting? Amanda asked, genuinely curious about where William was leading the conversation. William leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. I'm suggesting that maybe we can turn this terrible moment into something positive. Maybe we can use what happened as a starting point for a conversation about respect, understanding, and the importance of seeing each other's humanity even in difficult situations. The conversation between Amanda and William continued for over an hour, far longer than anyone had anticipated. What emerged was a complex picture of two people whose lives had intersected at their respective breaking points, creating a moment of violence that neither truly represented who they were at their core. Amanda found herself opening up about the pressures of her high-stress career, the loneliness of constant travel, and the way she had built her entire identity around being in control of every situation. I think I've been angry for so long that I forgot it was a choice, she admitted. When things don't go the way I expect them to, I just get angrier instead of trying to understand why. William shared his own struggles with the transition from active combat duty to ceremonial service, the challenge of channeling his protective instincts into stillness, and the weight of representing something larger than himself every day. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm disappearing behind the uniform," he said. "People see the ceremony, the tradition, the symbol, but they don't see the person inside who's trying his best to honor something important." The lawyers exchanged glances, both recognizing that this conversation was moving far beyond the typical victim-perpetrator dynamic. Prosecutor Mitchell found herself reassessing her approach to the case. While Martin Goldstein began to see possibilities for resolution, that didn't involve his client facing the maximum penalties. "What you're both describing," Williams said, thoughtfully, "sounds like isolation." "You were isolated in your frustration, and I was isolated in my role. Neither of us was seeing the other person clearly. Maybe that's part of what went wrong." Amanda nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I've been thinking about that moment constantly since it happened. I keep seeing your face right after I hit you, and there was something in your expression that I didn't expect. You looked hurt, but not just physically. You looked disappointed, like I had confirmed something negative you were thinking about people." "I was disappointed," William admitted. "Not in you specifically, because I didn't know you, but in the situation. I've dedicated my life to serving others, to representing the best values I know how to represent. Service with violence, it makes me question whether what I'm doing has any real meaning." The honesty of his response hit Amanda like a physical blow. She realized that her moment of anger hadn't just been an assault on one person, had been an attack on everything that person stood for and believed in. The weight of that understanding was almost unbearable. "How do I make this right?" Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do I fix the damage I've done?" William was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I've been thinking about that too. Traditional justice would say that you should be punished for what you did, and maybe that's still necessary. But I keep wondering if there might be a way to turn this situation into something that helps other people avoid making similar mistakes." He turned to Prosecutor Mitchell. "Ma'am, I'd like to make a formal request, instead of seeking the maximum penalty. I'd like to explore the possibility of a restorative justice approach. I want Ms. Rivers to face consequences for her actions, but I also want those consequences to create something positive." The prosecutor was intrigued despite her initial reservations. Restorative justice programs focused on healing and understanding, rather than purely punitive measures, but they were rarely used in cases involving assault on military personnel. "What exactly are you proposing, Sergeant?" William outlined his idea. Amanda would plead guilty to the assault charge, but receive a suspended sentence contingent on her participation in a community service program focused on supporting military families and veterans. Additionally, she would work with William to develop educational materials about cultural sensitivity, respect for service members, and conflict escalation that could be used in schools and community organizations. The goal wouldn't be to excuse what happened, William explained, but to ensure that some good comes from it. Ms. Rivers clearly has leadership abilities and professional skills that could be put to positive use. Instead of just punishing her, we could channel her energy into something that honors the service she disrespected. Amanda was amazed by the generosity of William's proposal. "You would trust me to do something like that? After what I did too?" I think people are capable of change," William replied. "And I think you're genuinely remorseful about what happened. But more than that, I think you have the potential to help other people understand why respect for service matters precisely. Because you experience firsthand what happens when that respect breaks down." Martin Goldstein was already calculating the legal benefits of William's proposal. A guilty plea with community service would allow Amanda to avoid prison time while taking responsibility for her actions. But he could also see that his client was moved by something deeper than legal strategy she was genuinely inspired by: William's faith in her capacity for redemption. The meeting concluded with an agreement to present the restorative justice proposal to the judge at the preliminary hearing. Both sides would need to work together to develop a specific plan that satisfied the legal requirements while creating meaningful opportunities for Amanda to make amends. As they prepared to leave, Amanda turned to William one final time. "Are you doing this for me? Why are you giving me a chance I don't deserve?" William's response would be remembered by everyone in the room, because I believe that how we respond to other people's worst moments says more about who we are than what they did in those moments. I could choose to hate you for what you did, or I could choose to help you become the person you were meant to be before anger and frustration got in the way. The preliminary hearing was postponed to allow both sides to develop the restorative justice proposal. But news of William's extraordinary response to Amanda's assault was already beginning to leak to the media. The story that had begun with shocking violence was about to take a turn that would surprise the world. 6 months after the incident that had made international headlines, Amanda Rivers stood before a packed courtroom in London for what would be the final hearing in her case. The media attention had not diminished. If anything, it had intensified. As word spread about William Chen's unprecedented response to her assault, representatives from news organizations around the world filled the press gallery, eager to document the conclusion of a story that had captivated millions of people. Amanda looked dramatically different from the angry, frustrated woman captured in those viral videos. The months of community service and reflection had changed her in ways that were visible even to strangers. Her posture was more humble, her expressions more thoughtful, and there was a calmness about her that suggested genuine personal transformation rather than mere legal strategy. Judge Eleanor Thornton had presided over thousands of criminal cases during her career, but she had never encountered a situation quite like this one. The restorative justice program that William and Amanda had developed had exceeded everyone's expectations, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond the original assault case. "Ms. Rivers," Judge Thornton began, "you have completed 500 hours of community service with the Royal British Legion, supporting veterans and their families. You have co-authored educational materials about cultural sensitivity and respect for military service that are now being used in schools across 3 countries. You have spoken at conferences about anger management and conflict resolution, sharing your personal story to help others avoid similar mistakes. How has this experience changed your understanding of what happened that day at Buckingham Palace?" Amanda stood to address the court, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Your Honor, what I did that day was inexcusable. I assaulted a decorated soldier who was simply doing his job, and I did it because I was too focused on my own frustration to see his humanity or dignity. The community service and educational work I've done hasn't been about earning forgiveness. It's been about understanding why respect matters and learning how to contribute something positive to the world instead of just taking what I want from it." She turned slightly to look at William, who was sitting in the gallery in his dress uniform. "Sergeant Chen could have demanded that I face the harshest possible consequences, and he would have been completely justified in doing so. Instead, he chose to see potential for good in someone who had shown him nothing but disrespect. That choice changed my life in ways I'm still discovering." The educational program they had created together had indeed achieved remarkable success. Their presentations to school groups, community organizations, and military families had reached over 10,000 people in 6 months. The materials they developed were being translated into multiple languages and adapted for use in different cultural contexts. What had begun as a way for Amanda to make amends had evolved into a comprehensive program for teaching empathy and respect across cultural and social divides. William had also been profoundly changed by the experience. His willingness to extend grace to Amanda had earned him recognition far beyond his military service. He had been invited to speak at conferences about restorative justice, leadership, and the power of choosing compassion over retribution. The incident that could have been a footnote in his military career had instead become a defining example of his character and values. The judge continued her review of the case. "Sergeant Chen, your response to this assault has been extraordinary by any measure. You chose reconciliation over revenge, education over punishment, and hope over hatred. What would you like to say about Ms. Rivers' progress and the program you've developed together?" William rose to address the court with the same dignity he had displayed throughout the entire ordeal. "Your Honor, I believe Ms. Rivers has demonstrated genuine remorse and meaningful change. But more than that, she has shown that people are capable of transforming their worst moments into something that serves others. The work we've done together has helped hundreds of families, prevented conflicts that might have escalated to violence, and created a model for how communities can respond constructively to interpersonal harm." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "When Ms. Rivers struck me that day, she was acting from a place of frustration and disconnection. The person standing before you now acts from a place of understanding and commitment to serving others. That transformation didn't happen by accident. Happened because she chose to do the hard work of changing herself from the inside out." The courtroom was completely silent as Judge Thornton prepared to deliver her final ruling. The suspended sentence that had been contingent on Amanda's successful completion of the restorative justice program was about to become permanent, marking the official end of the criminal case, but not the end of the program they had created. "Ms. Rivers," the judge announced, "you have fulfilled all requirements of your sentence and demonstrated exceptional commitment to making amends for your actions. The court hereby formally closes this case with the notation that it represents a model example of restorative justice principles applied successfully." As the hearing concluded, Amanda and William met outside the courthouse, where hundreds of reporters were waiting. They had decided to make one final joint statement before going their separate ways, though their collaboration on educational programs would continue. "What happened 6 months ago was a moment of violence and disrespect," Amanda said into the cluster of microphones. "What happened afterward was a demonstration of grace, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption that exists in every situation if we're brave enough to look for it." William added his own perspective. "We all have moments when we're not at our best, when frustration or anger leads us to act in ways that don't reflect our true values. Well, the question isn't whether those moments will happen, it's how we choose to respond when they do. We can choose punishment and separation, or we can choose understanding and transformation." The story of Amanda and William became a case study in law schools, a teaching tool in conflict resolution programs, and an inspiration to thousands of people who had witnessed their own worst moments being transformed into opportunities for growth and service. Years later, Amanda would establish a foundation focused on supporting military families, while William would eventually leave active duty to work full-time in veteran services. Their brief, violent encounter had evolved into a lifelong commitment to turning conflict into understanding and individual transformation into community benefit. The slap that shocked the world had become a handshake that changed it, proving that even our worst moments can become the foundation for our best contributions, if we have the courage to let them transform us rather than define us. 5 years after that October morning at Buckingham Palace, Amanda received a letter that would bring tears to her eyes. It was from a teenage girl in Manchester whose father had returned from military deployment with severe PTSD. The girl wrote that she had seen Amanda and William's presentation at her school and learned how to approach her father's struggles with patience and understanding, rather than frustration and anger. "Your story taught me that when people act badly, it's usually because they're hurting inside," the girl wrote. "Instead of getting mad at my dad when he has bad days, I try to remember what you said about looking for the person behind the behavior. It's helped our whole family heal." Letters like this arrived regularly now, from teachers who used their educational materials, from veterans who had been helped by programs Amanda funded, from young people who had learned to manage their anger by understanding her story. Each letter was a reminder that William's decision to choose compassion over condemnation had created ripples that continued to spread across the world. William, now working as a counselor for veterans transitioning to civilian life, kept a photo on his desk from that final court hearing. It showed him and Amanda shaking hands outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters but looking only at each other with expressions of mutual respect and understanding. Colleagues often asked about the photo, giving him opportunities to share the story and its lessons about the power of forgiveness and redemption. The incident had taught them both that transformation was possible at any age, in any circumstance. If people were willing to do the difficult work of examining their own behavior and choosing to become better versions of themselves, Amanda had learned that true strength came not from dominating situations but from serving others. William had learned that sometimes the greatest victory was not in defeating an enemy, but in helping them become an ally. Their story continued to inspire people around the world who faced their own moments of poor judgment, their own conflicts that seemed impossible to resolve, their own opportunities to choose between revenge and reconciliation. The slap that had lasted 5 seconds had created changes that would last lifetimes, proving that even the darkest moments can become sources of light if we have the wisdom to let them illuminate our path toward becoming who we were meant to be. Amanda Rivers and William Chen had begun as strangers whose brief encounter represented the worst of human nature. They had become partners in demonstrating the best of human nature, showing that grace and forgiveness could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The woman who had struck a guard in anger had become an advocate for veterans' families. The guard who had been assaulted had become a teacher of compassion and understanding. Their legacy was not the moment of violence that made them famous, but the years of service that followed, proving that redemption is always possible and that the most powerful response to hatred is not more hatred, but love expressed through action, service, and an unshakable belief in the potential for human beings to change, grow, and contribute something beautiful to the world.